There's a new way to stay connected and know what's happening with Market to Market when you subscribe to Market Insider. One email and a lot of information awaits you. Go to markettomarket.org and subscribe to Market Insider. A couple of years ago, we had a podcast called Yes, Virginia, Phil in Canada is Real. That was our first conversation in this format here on the M2M podcast with Philip Shaw from Dresden, Ontario. If you say, I've heard that before, if you watch the TV show, yes, you have. Phil in Canada, or Phil in Ontario, as we say, is a regular contributor to Questions. And he's often watching from his position in Ontario. In fact, he's farther south than a lot of our producers in the United States. He's watching American agriculture. He's watching Canadian agriculture. He's watching tariff and trade discussions between the two countries. We're going to talk about that today. His view as a Canadian farmer of what's going on in Canada and in America when it comes to agriculture, trade, and tariffs. We'll get his perspective about the relationships between the two countries. We'll maybe talk about one tiny little sports reference, but really we're going to get into some nostalgia and something that's going on with Canadian farmers right now. That is this installment of the podcast. A reminder, if you have an idea for me, send it to me, paul.yeager@iowapbs.org. We look forward to you joining us each and every week here on the M2M podcast. I'm Paul Yeager, which is produced at Iowa PBS and through the Market to Market TV show. Now, let's get to Philip. What do you think, Phil? Can Americans and Canadians still be friends?
We sure can. We've always been friends, and we'll be friends into the future. And we have a few hiccups once in a while, but we're going to be okay. That's what I believe, anyway.
Have you always felt that way about the U.S., that there's always, you're so close to, I'm not saying you can see America from your house, but you are right there in that area where you're farther south than a whole bunch of people that watch this program or that farm in the United States.
Yeah, I might be farther south than you. I'm not quite sure, but
it's possible. It's very close.
Have I always felt that way? No, I haven't always felt that way. And unfortunately, it's been lately that I felt those things, but we'll be okay. We'll be okay. I always remind everybody that we fought wars 150 years ago in places like Detroit and the Battle of the Thames here in Ontario and Queenston Heights. And Canadian students always take about the War of 1812. I don't think my friends in the United States know much about it, but I know that both people interpret it a little bit differently. I apologize. There were a few Canadians with the British that they burned down the White House, but those days are long over with.
Well, we're getting ready to celebrate America 250, so maybe that will come back up. Who knows?
Yeah. I'm old enough to remember the 200th anniversary, and we had lots of American friends up on that weekend. I was a teenager at the time. So, yeah, that'll be a good big party for you folks down there. So, good.
We're going to have even some Iowa PBS events that are centered around America 250. Will be kind of fun. We just heard about those last week. Let's put a bow, I guess, on 2025 crop year for farmer Phil.
Well, here in southwestern Ontario, the stars aligned quite well. Unfortunately, in the rest of Ontario, there was very bad drought east of Toronto going into Quebec, and the Ontario corn crop was hampered because of that. But with regard to my crop, which is, and keep in mind for viewers, I'm about 60 miles east of Detroit, Michigan. I had timely rains. I had a very difficult time getting soybeans planted and getting them to grow. But once I got them to grow at the end of June, basically I gave up. Kept getting heavy rains and couldn't get them out of the ground. But at the end of the day, I had a record corn crop for my farm, and in southwestern Ontario, right around here, we had huge yields, much bigger than we'd ever had before. And I've been at this for a while, so I remember when 150 bushels per acre was crazy, and now we're over 100 above that. And so we did pretty well that last year. Soybeans were above my expectations. So at the end of the day, we use all kinds of risk management tools to help us out, but getting a big crop is always one of the best things you can do.
Refresh me on Canadian agriculture counting of acres. What's your version of USDA, and how do those reports align with USDA?
I would say that it's much more important to American farmers than the USDA numbers. Frankly, the USDA numbers are very important to Canadian farmers. Keep in mind, I always say there's three countries when you talk about Canadian agriculture. It's the Western Canada, which has vast acreage of canola, oats, wheat, and things of that nature. And there's Ontario, which is very synonymous with Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. And then there's Quebec, which is totally different, and where French is the first language, and supply management and dairy dominate there. So with regard to accounting information, USDA is very important to everybody. It's especially important to Quebec and Ontario farmers. And I do a lot of writing in Eastern Canada, and I follow the USDA all the time. As far as Canadian numbers, I've actually heard quite a bit of that quoted from my American friends who talk about, it's usually about canola numbers and wheat numbers and oats numbers, usually from Western Canada, because our numbers aren't quite as big as that. Typically, they don't get quoted in American media. But from a Canadian perspective, we're very key on USDA reports. And like, for instance, your program, Market to Market, it's big here. It's big. And maybe I helped make it bigger, but it's down our alley what we need, the information that we need for our market decisions. So
we've long always celebrated you as a champion, Phil, of the program. We always appreciate your support, both with questions and with endorsements of what we're doing. When you heard the numbers come in January, you always talk about how big we always talk about how big that report number is. Regardless of what the end product said or what you believe the end product was that the USDA submitted, what does it mean on that day for you in terms of, gosh, I better have positions set here or here? How much does a Canadian producer pay attention to that USDA in terms of their own marketing?
Well, it's big. Yeah, it's big. I guess I have many opinions about USDA numbers from time to time. That one was huge. 17 billion bushels of corn, plus 17.02, I think it was. And Paul, I can remember telling producers here that we're going to have a huge crop. It's going to be 8 billion bushels. The productivity has just been incredible for the American farmer, just incredible. The difference with this one was, though, is like 17.02 billion bushels, but you had many analysts on your program talking, my gosh, the harvested acreage was so much higher than what they were estimated last June and July. And that's what I really had a hard time getting over with, is the difference between January and where they were last June and July. It's hard for me to fathom. But that's why a program like yours is so important for somebody like me, because I get the different perspectives, because it's, in Ontario and Canada, it's a little bit more difficult to get the nuance of these types of things. And also keep in mind that in Ontario or in Quebec, anywhere in Canada, but especially Ontario and Quebec, you have to keep in mind the value of the Canadian dollar. Think of it as Brazilian farmers thinking of the value of the Brazilian real versus the US dollar. The Canadian dollar, when it's low versus the US dollar, means our cash prices are higher because of that. And so we always have to balance futures prices with what the value of the Canadian dollar is and what our cash prices are. But with regard to the USDA, things have changed through the years, as you know. Trading algorithms are all dialed in all the time, and they're programmed to buy and sell depending on what happens. And with USDA, they're dialed in like no tomorrow. And so what happened that day, we lost 24 cents on corn, and we're all standing around looking at each other, but the algorithms simply don't have emotions like we do. And so it's something that I know American farmers are key on, and they've got lots of opinions on. But from a Canadian perspective, especially Eastern Canada, USDA reports are somewhat important. I also feel that knowing your basis levels and knowing future spreads are very important. Frankly, I think it's more important than USDA numbers. but it makes it a little bit more difficult in Canada to monitor U.S. basis values. I'm lucky because I write for DTN, an American company, and so I can get that information rather more easily than you could if you were just here without that. But USDA numbers are important, but we also have to think about foreign exchange. And I know maybe some my American friends have been thinking about that the last couple of weeks because the U.S. dollar's been sinking, and it affects your wheat market and things of that nature. But in Canada, we think about it every day. Every day we think about that. Yeah, yeah.
You just said the E word, the emotions. Let's dive into that a little bit. What's the emotional level right now of a Canadian producer when they see their prime minister have a conversation about American trade? I'm not even saying agriculture. I'm just saying trade right now. When you hear whether it was Trudeau, now Carney, what goes through your mind?
Well, I don't think it's not very pleasant. Canadians are used to being more ignored by our American friends versus being part of the conversation. And so I don't write about politics. I have to comment on it from time to time. Your American president is not the most popular person with Canadian farmers, simply because of what he has said about Canada in the 51st state and Governor Carney, and before that, Governor Trudeau. And he also mentioned about not taking part in NATO exercises, being behind the lines when people have died in Afghanistan and different places, plus the fact that on 9/11, where do you think those planes landed? They didn't land in the United States. We landed them in Canada that day. So, I think that's just a narrative. That's a narrative. You probably know that. You probably have get similar sentiment from some American farmers not. But it's been pretty tough lately with regard to some of the rhetoric about we don't need Canadian cars, we don't need Canadian steel, we don't need Canadian aluminum. And, it's pretty tough because we have to adjust. And like our Canadian Prime Minister says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that's the way it feels. That's the way that it feels right now. But still, I think for most Americans and most Canadians, I'm hoping that we find a way and we continue this good relationship we've had almost forever. So,
your comment about if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Is that a new sentiment?
That's a new sentiment from our Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He spoke in Davos 2 weeks ago, and that speech went over very well worldwide, but the American president didn't think is so good. But I just want to emphasize that we've had a free trade arrangement with the United States since 1988. And one of the toughest negotiators of free trade was Mr. Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a very tough negotiator. And there was no guarantee that we were going to get that in 1989 when it first came out, because Mr. Reagan was such a tough negotiator. So all American presidents, regardless of political stripe, whether Democratic or Republican, we always feel that they're tough negotiators. And in Canada, we prefer to get along with our friends. And it's the same thing with President Trump. We want to get along with President Trump, and I'm sure our Canadian Prime Minister and the negotiators on both sides will, at the end of the day, hopefully will find a way. Just some of the rhetoric has just been a little bit more pointed this time around. And so hopefully we'll get there.
Has any of the rhetoric become real? Have you seen tangible changes?
Sure. Oh, definitely. Oh, it's so real. Like, for instance, Canadians are your largest trading partner and we are yours. And I think there's, a 40% drop in tourism in the United States. And Canadians aren't traveling to the United States anymore simply because they're trying to choose anything other than that. That is a big thing. There's a real rupture in the automotive supply between Detroit and Windsor and southwestern Ontario and Michigan because of the tariffs that were put on. And then 50% on steel and aluminum. We don't pay the tariffs. It's the American people that pay the tariffs. But it's resulting in a lot less demand. So we're having steel plants closing. The same thing with auto plants. Layoffs are here. With regard to agricultural trade, just locally, there's all kinds of it across the U.S. and Canadian border, whether you're shipping seed or whether you're shipping grain. But there's reluctance from American buyers and sellers to go across the border like there used to be. Same with Canadian, because of the unsure nature of things. For instance, the American president said last week if we had a free trade arrangement with China, he put 100% tariffs on Canadian goods. Well, how would Iowa farmers like 100% tariffs on Canadian potash when they're putting that on? So this just comes out of the blue. So it just makes it very, very, very difficult. The fact is that there's a clause in the USMCA that says that Canada won't have a free trade arrangement with China. So, things are uneven right now, and I would be disingenuous to imply that they're not. But we're hoping to get through this, and I'm sure we will. I would like to hope that, but it's definitely changed the game here. Like you say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Maybe you'll be both. I don't know, but it's very real, the sentiment and the change of things. And but I appreciate my American friends. I appreciate your program. It's great every week, great for Canadian farmers, and hopefully with all these problems that are coming up, that we'll find a way to get through it, because the United States and Canada have always been on the same team, and I just see this the same way going ahead. But we're going to have a few more issues now. And the Greenland problem was a problem for us too, because we're 27 kilometers away from Greenland in the northern part of Canada. And, we've got a lot of Canadian Arctic in the archipelago. And so, but we weren't part of that conversation 2 weeks ago. You never heard Canada once, but here you did, because we were wondering whether we're going to be on the menu or at the table with that. And this is all ongoing, and it will probably continue. And it does affect me as a Canadian farmer going across the border all the time. And it affects the traders on the American side, maybe even more so, because they're the ones paying the tariffs, and they're the one dealing with this. So, but keep in mind that American presidents all throughout your history have been tough negotiators, and they have to stand up for their own country. And they've always negotiated really tough with Canada, and that's fine. I suppose we've tried to do the same thing, but I'm still hoping we find a good way through this.
I can't decide if I want to use a sports analogy to set up this question, but we'll just start. It's approaching the trading deadline for your favorite sport, the NBA.
That's right.
And right now it would appear that there are a lot of teams looking to change partners or players. You've got India and China having conversations, or you have European countries working directly with South America. I mean, we have these trading partners that are changing. Do you know? I mean, of course, you're not in the parliament there or in the halls listening to or hearing what the discussions are, but do you see a day when the Canada and United States trade relations are where we're not the top trading partners with each other because we've gone elsewhere?
No, I don't see that. And it's true that when your biggest trading partner is telling you we don't need your cars, we don't need your steel, we don't need your aluminum, we don't need your lumber, we don't need anything. Well, if you're us, you have to kind of take the person at its word from time to time. And so you better start trading with other people. But there's no way. I mean, we might diversify to some extent, but we share the largest undefended border in the world. We're very culturally similar. We have a third of our farmers are French speaking, or a quarter of our farmers are French speaking. So maybe there are some cultural differences. But because of the proximity with each other, I never see the day where that changes. Like, for instance, take Mexico, for example. Mexico and the United States. I mean, your trade relationship is huge. Just think about the amount of corn that you ship at Mexico. And you've had quite a discussion. I love when Ross Baldwin's on, because he talks about beef, right? And my gosh, talk about bright and talk about a good discussion. And I'm just soaking it all up. But you're talking about the screwworm problem in Mexico, right? And you're talking about this and that. But the bottom line is, Mexico and the United States are probably going to continue to be huge traders. And it's the same for Canada and the United States. We're probably going to be huge traders, but still, there's problems come up, like lately. Like I can tell you, I've talked to some of my Brazilian friends that say that everybody wants to trade, but they don't want to trade with the United States. Simply because of the rhetoric that comes out sometimes, and so they're looking for other venues. You take for instance, corn into Mexico. Will that be challenged at times by northern ports from Brazil shipping corn into Mexico? Maybe, maybe not, because you've got such good advantages. So, and those good advantages have to do with geography and culture and politics changes. You know that. I don't know. I'm not an authority on American politics. I don't understand how your Congress works. With you,
Neither do the people who work there, I think, sometimes.
Well,
but continue
sometimes
on.
I wonder. But the bottom line is politics even changes sometimes. We have geographic proximity. We have a justice system that works. So I never see the day where, no, we're not our biggest trading partners. Now, maybe Mexico might get through that, and China on some sectors might get through that, depending on what happens in the world. But I never see the reason that will happen. I don't see the reason why it needs to. Because from a Canadian perspective, you're going, why does this have to happen? Why does this happen? But it is, and maybe it's a negotiating strategy, maybe it isn't. I don't know.
Well, that's what we hear, is that it's a strategy, and the end goal is somewhere down the road. But there's a sentiment by those that think, well, if we can do it in country, we don't need it from somebody else. But you've mentioned the products that we can't always do in the United States. But if there's improvements that in how someone, whether it is in grain or in the cattle, because you think out in Montana, the stuff that goes across the border, or in Washington, that gets fed or finished or processed, we can get into labels. The same with Mexico. You mentioned the thought is, from what I hear the president say, is, well, we can do that in the United States. We don't need Canada or Mexico or China to do it.
Yeah,
and that has been the commonality of what and why we hear it. I use an anecdote every once in a while from someone that I know that his job changed because the original NAFTA took his job and shipped it to Mexico, and he's never liked trade since. And he's a long time American
that sentiment
farmer.
for sure. Yep, there's that sentiment for sure. As you know, I've been a long time writer into the United States from Canada, and I get really quite the letters from beef people, even in places like Montana and North Dakota and places like that. But as you know, sometimes a calf is raised in Montana and it's shipped to Alberta to be fed, and then it's shipped back to North Dakota to be fed some more, and then it's shipped maybe to Manitoba to ship some more, and then maybe shipped to Ontario and finally finished off. And then maybe it's shipped to the United States to get slaughtered, and then beef is back into Canada. We have a very complicated, integrated supply chain between Canada and the United States. And so when you throw tariffs into the mix, and not only that, the threat of tariffs, it slows things down. I'm not here to comment on American politics because I don't have citizenship. My comments are coming from the receiving end of a lot of this and the perceptions that I may have.
I see, because of you, I followed more Canadian farmers online, and I see some of their comments, and they were long critical of Justin Trudeau. They're critical of Carney for various reasons, like people are critical of the president here. That debate is, we always think, healthy in the United States. Do you view that debate healthy in Canada, internally in your own country?
That what you hear is in English.
I hadn't thought of it that way.
And what I find is, and this narrative from Western Canada is what it is, but it's very critical. You never hear the French, even though you have French-speaking viewers, of market to market, because I've told my Quebec writers, because I write in French, right? My work goes to Quebec and is translated into French. And our French Canadian farmers have a different attitude than that. And they're Quebecers first. But they would have a different attitude than that. And part of the problem is because we speak different languages, it's not often brought up and come to the fore. But lots of my American friends criticize their own government, whether it's Democratic or whether it's Republican or state governments or or whatever it is, local governments. And it's similar here. It's similar here. However, I would say there's a big difference. And your elected Senate means that the farm constituency or the farm vote is much more important than it is here in Canada because we have an elected parliament. So the farm vote is diluted. While you have two senators from Wyoming, you have two senators from Montana, two from Kansas, two from Rhode Island, two from California. So the power of the farm vote is much stronger in the United States. And so, I mean, I'm sure American farmers still criticize politicians, but typically you have a better farm voice in the United States. And I believe, I've always written, it's partly because of the elected Senate with the regional representation you have. For instance, I'll give you an example. Bob Dole, he was a senator from Kansas for many, many, many years, a big wheat state. And so wheat producers were well represented with him because he was one of two senators. And in Canada, we don't have anything like that. So, for instance, one policy that's on right now in the United States is the bridge payments that President Trump has proposed. And I'll let you tell me when that's going to be distributed. But the point of it is you have a very strong farm lobby based on your political system. In Canada, we're not getting anything like that, and we will not get anything like that. Partly because of the political system that we have. But yeah, politics is a kind of a blood sport, probably on both sides of the border, at different levels, I suppose.
Well, one of those issues that I think, Dole is the father of the modern farm bill, which we haven't had a new one in now going on 6 years. And it doesn't look like it's going to happen yet this year, although there is talk of a skinny bill, whatever that means. I don't know. But there's still always, Phil, this conversation of, well, if the U.S. could compete in the dairy industry, and that always seems to be a non-starter with Canada and the U.S., and everything just kind of then goes sideways. Is that really the only non-starter that the two countries have, agriculture base, that they don't want to engage in, or that there's going to be any change in?
That's definitely a big one. And the conversation here in Canada that matters is in French, okay? Because Quebec dominates our dairy industry. Why? Because over a period of years, they built it up, and they've got within our system, and the Quebec province threatened our federal government through the years to secede from Canada. And there's been two separation referendums in Canadian history, one in 1980, one in 1995, where this country came within 30,000 votes in Quebec of losing the country, where Quebec was looking to be sovereign. So the dairy economy within Quebec is very important because they're very politically active, and they're very strong, and they're very aggressive. And so it makes it difficult for any Canadian government to change. And not only that, any Canadian opposition party to change. Because you might have heard a lot of derision with regard to supply management from Canadians from Western Canada, but there's not one federal politician that would stand up and be against it in this country because of how strong it is. Now, I do think the differences with regard to our American friends regarding dairy are technical. They're somewhat technical. It really doesn't have a lot to do with production, because shipping your milk and dairy products into Canada is really not going to do you much good. I listened to Naomi Bloom you have on, and one thing you always ask Naomi about is dairy prices. And when I listen to that, I always think, it's so interesting to listen to Naomi talk about dairy futures and milk futures and stuff like that, because we don't have anything like that, right? I mean, we dairy producers are profitable, and it's because of what we have. Now, our American friends, Mr. Trump mentions a lot of times, talk about more access in Canada. And that will probably be one of the hard sticking points that we have as we go ahead with what you call USMCA, but what we call CUSMA this coming year. However, I do think the problems that between the two sides have much more to do with definitions and technical issues than it does with anything our American friends want to put big dairy production in here because we're not that big of a country, you know. And I was in a dairy farm in Indiana a few years ago, and I think they had 30,000 cows, right? I went through the barn in a bus, right? We have nothing like that here. So you know, yes, that's going to be a sticking point. And I told you the cultural and the political realities of that, so it makes it very difficult. And plus, there might be a Quebec referendum coming up on separation either this year or next year, because the Separatist Party in Quebec is leading in the polls now. So that's a Canadian problem that I don't think our American friends are that interested in, and
Well, but
that's fine.
given what you just said, though, is we should be. And to understand we know where our criticisms come in this country. To understand our friends and what some of their struggles are helps us better, I think, be better friends. Because then
Sure.
we can understand an issue and maybe concede something here to get something over here. One of the things you wrote about recently for DTN that caught my eye was one word, and that's nostalgia. Why did you use that word, and what were you exactly referring to?
So that was in my latest column for DTN, and it's specific to what Prime Minister Carney said in Davos. And he said nostalgia is not a strategy. And it might be nice for Canadians to think that we've always been friends with Americans. We've always had this huge free trade area across North America. It's always been the way it's been. We've gone back and forth between Detroit and Windsor to watch hockey games forever. Detroit Tigers, everything. Detroit Lions, everything. You know, but, you know, those times are over, unfortunately. And so the new horizon, I'm hoping, is good, but it just won't be based on that. It'll be based on something new. For instance, our prime minister just recently solved the problem with canola with China, as I'm sure you know. The Chinese banned imports of Canadian meal and canola seed after we put 100% tariffs on with the Biden administration on Chinese electric vehicles. Obviously, that caused all kinds of problems in Western Canada. Well, that was just taken away recently, right? And the prime minister got the Chinese to take that away, and now we're getting 49,000 EVs imported from China into Canada. So that's something new. But nostalgia says that we can all just get along and everything will just be fine. But that's not where we're at now. And I related it to prices in that column, and I said I can't remember what the prices I quoted because the March corn and the different nearby months, I just don't know exactly what they are right now. It's always a problem when I ask a question to DTN because you have to anticipate what's going to happen Friday for your question to be relevant.
Yeah.
But what I related to is the low prices we have now, somewhat nostalgic, meaning that we'd like a lot higher prices based on our cost of production and things like that. So that's why I mentioned that.
Well, and I think that's a little bit tied to the last thing I kind of want to get to is, and I guess ask the relevance and if it's a sentiment that's shared by your neighbors. We hear all the time, we just want, farmers just say they just want a market. They don't want that bridge payment if they don't have to. They just want the chance to compete. Is that a nostalgic thought that is done existing? Because if you've got countries mad at each other or leaders mad at each other, that doesn't sound like there's going to be any fair market trade anytime soon.
I would agree with that, and that's the way we feel here. I don't ascribe to what you just said with regard all farmers want to do is market. Well, maybe that's what they want to do. I have a background in agricultural economics, and there's always a problem with overabundance in any agricultural economy. So I actually think the hybrid model, some type of hybrid model, is better. I actually am a strong supporter of Canadian supply management of dairy, poultry, and things. And I never used to be. I used to think it was a crazy idea, but everybody was going broke, right? And I wish there was a way to get profit to the farmer, whether he's in Illinois, Indiana, or Ontario, in a different way. Because, it's pretty tough now with the prices we got. Every week you ask different analysts about these prices, and we're all hoping they get better. But a lot of times the analysts say, well, you got to know your cost of production. You got to do this because it's pretty tough. Pretty tough. So I wish there was some type of a different way than farmers just want to market, because I talk about big supply a lot when I write for DTN because we got big supply. Like one of your first questions every week is about, let's talk about wheat. Well, the answer about wheat is it's grown everywhere, every month of the year, or it's harvested every month of the year somewhere. So there's always gaps that fill the supply. And it's true that the American wheat in Kansas has a place, and you have a huge domestic market, so you use it a lot. But otherwise, as soon as you export wheat, you're competing from wheat from Ukraine, from Argentina, from who knows where else. I went to a meeting last year, and somebody was complaining about Pakistan wanting soybeans, and they were cut off from their supplier, and they got them from Africa. And I thought, my gosh, what do you mean from Africa? And I asked the buyer, and he said, well, they do produce soybeans in Africa, not very many. But if you wanted soybeans, they would ship them. The quality's pretty bad, but so there's supply everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Our agricultural economic model makes it so we all face a perfectly elastic demand curve. That means we go out every spring, and I'm just like anybody else in Illinois and Indiana, Michigan. I'm going to try to produce as much as we can. And look what happened. The American farmers produced 17.02 billion bushels of corn last year. The Brazilian farmers producing 177 million metric tons of soybeans this year. Is it too hard to imagine that the Brazilians will be producing 200 million metric tons in a few years? Most likely. And the American farmer hitting 20 billion bushels of corn? So this is the reality we're in. Big supply is winning. It's helped on by technology and genetics and the sweat of the American farmer and the sweat of the Canadian farmer. But here we are.
Well, it's funny you said what you just did. Ross Baldwin last week said, well, the farmer still thinks they can overproduce their way out of the problem. They can produce their way out of the problem. That's a sentiment that's not new. But I do want to go back to what you just said about South America and Brazil. We're getting close, if we're not there already, that the soybean market looks a lot like the wheat market, like you just said. It's produced and gaps get filled that didn't used to. The gaps used to exist, therefore adding some premium. That's much harder for the soybean farmer to work through now as they try to stay profitable.
That is so true. And
there's no question there, Phil. Sorry. I'm not giving you anything to talk about, but.
Well, no, like for instance, I can remember when Brazil was irrelevant, right? And every year they got more. And I've got lots of Brazilian friends, some who I've met with here in Canada, who've come to, they didn't come to see me, but they were here and they asked me to get together. And I got together with some grain merchandisers. But yes, it does make the farmer's job a little bit more difficult. I talk about a weather market. Typically here, a former analyst that was on your show, Elaine Cubb, she always used to write a column that June 18th is the time to sell corn. And that was always based on, she wrote the book, Mastering the Grain Markets. And, and she said, and we all know that, June is kind of seasonality with corn. That's when you should sell new crop corn. Well, now there's more than one weather market, right? There's a weather market right now in South America, right? We've been watching for some drought weather hiccup all December and January. It hasn't really come. It just, so here we are, right? And one of the next ones will be here in the United States and Canada, well, especially in the United States, when folks go out to the field and blow the dust off the corn planter and go plant corn and try to do even better than next year. And if we have a hiccup in that time, like we did in 2012, well, that's a weather market. So yes, this is making it more complex for the American and Canadian farmer to market grain. In Canada, we have the extra layer of the foreign exchange with Canadian dollar that we have to balance. Americans do too, but they don't think of it that way. They just think a dollar's a dollar. But the American dollar dropping actually helps you guys on wheat futures, But it is what it is. So it's a complex thing. I write about marketing all the time here because I write for the Grain Farmers Ontario and I write for publications, and I never know exactly. I just lay out the market factors that are involved, and people can make their own decisions. So.
Phil, if you had a magic column to write that would get us through the next 2 to 4 years for either country, what would be some key points of that? And I'm not saying get through, because there's some that think that this is just fine. But
Well,
things change. I'm not saying it's a rubber band that's going to snap back. It's more of a gradual up and down. This policy of this administration will change to this policy. What's that column? What's some of the content of that column going to look like if you write that story?
well, on the American side, an American reader once told me that because I don't have citizenship, I don't really have a right to an opinion on American politics. And I agreed with them. I thought, okay, that's a little tough, but that's true. So I really won't offer an opinion on American politics other than the fact that from an American perspective, or from a Canadian perspective, in my view, the American government always takes care of the American farmer. Just whether it's Democratic or Republican, typically the American government, typically compared to us especially, takes care of the American farmer. And I think that will continue regardless of political stripe, whether it's a Republican or Democrat. And true, my American friends will probably complain and worry about their politician. That's fine. But I think they'll take care of their the American farmer, the American government will. In Canada, I think it's much more tenuous. I kind of laid that out in my latest column. We don't have the safety nets and no bridge payments coming here. We don't have that at all. So we're looking more at, in my view, you have to cut your fixed costs. So what are fixed costs? Well, those are land costs, machinery costs. You're going to have to find a different way, especially if you grow what we call a non-supply managed sector, which means grain and cattle and hogs. You're going to have to find a different way, cut your costs, be better marketers. With regard to the supply managed sector, which is milk and poultry, I hope it continues. It's certainly under threat from our traders, our Quebec farmers that don't speak English. And when I go to Quebec, I speak in Quebec, and it's translated. And I sit down at lunch with people that don't speak English, and we manage to understand each other. But there's strong Quebec First people that believe in supply management, and I would like to see it sustained. But that debate that might be something that might be a little tougher to do, but I think it would be sustained. I don't see any reason for them to start selling milk like I sell corn. Mm-hmm. To me, that would be a huge step backwards. So, we're at a tough point now, but time is a funny thing. And but I see our American friends and Canadian friends, we will get along as we go into the future. And maybe the political rhetoric is a little bit hot from time to time, but we have no reason but not to get together, not to be together, and to get along. And that's what I'm hoping for as we move ahead.
Phil, I always appreciate the questions, the insight, and the feedback. Keep bringing the feedback to me. I always like to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate tuning into your program every week, and I also listen to your podcast, usually in a tractor. I find them incredibly interesting, and I know some of the people that are on the podcast. Like, for instance, Arlen Suderman. Mm-hmm. He came to Dresden, where I'm from, last year to speak. So I went up and introduced myself, and he knew of me because I'm on Twitter, right? And we've talked about Elaine Cobb and others, Darren Newsom through the years, and other people that I've ran into. But sometimes I just want you to know that Phil from Ontario will write a question, but sometimes I have to anticipate how the market action is going to be for 2 days. And sometimes it's hard to make the question remain relevant.
Right, and I get that, and that's a big ask, and we know that that can happen. Things change. Heck, things change. I, in fact, write about it a lot in the newsletter and say, from Friday afternoon when we walked out of the studio, something changed. Or Ted will pull out his phone and go, well, what I just said is no longer valid, Yeah. As Virgil Robinson always used to say, as we sit here tonight, Mark, this is the story.
Yeah, that's right. I met Virgil. He came here to speak too, so...
Yeah. All right, Phil, great to see you. Great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Certainly a pleasure. Thank you.
New episodes come out each and every Tuesday. The audio formats, wherever you get your podcasts. The video mostly comes on our website of market2market.org, as well as our YouTube channel. The production supervisor for Iowa PBS is Sean Ingracia. His crew, which always helps us out, is Reed Denker, Kevin Rivers, Neil Kyer, Julie Knutson, David Feingold. The executive producer of Market to Market is David Miller. I'm Paul Yeager. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.